In today's video, we're going to be talking about the urban legend of the Gateway to Hell, located in Stoll, Kansas. Now, the Gateway is located inside of an old abandoned church on the grounds of a cemetery. And it's not only the church that has frightening stories. There's also a tree in the cemetery that has some very interesting stories as well. Now, the tree is called the Hanging Tree, and they say that under the hanging tree is a gravestone that has been split in half by the ghosts of dead witches. As the days get shorter and the night sky holds dominion over the planet Earth, 'tis the season for the undead, the unbelievable, and the unexplained. And though there are many recipes for what we call these tales of horror, these spooky stories passed down from generation to generation and urban legends, the main ingredients remain the same. And not coincidentally, they include historically shared motifs of the American landscape. Because often things that are the most familiar can be the most frightening. The church on the corner, whispering cornfields, a broken streetlight, an old bridge, a widow's peak. After all, spooky stories have to start in some way, and it's usually with a glimmer of truth that lends itself to fanciful exaggeration. They say that in the basement of the abandoned church in Stoll, Kansas, there's a staircase. And if you follow that staircase and keep going down further and further, you'll reach the entrance to hell. And if you can crawl your way back up and escape from the bowels of hell to reach the surface, you'll have to climb for weeks. Now that is, if the devil doesn't grab you first. Like all great ghost stories, legends of stairwells into the devil's own lair have burned like hellfire through many decades, evolving and growing stronger and more real every time they're told. They are stories we know well and seek out with great curiosity. But why? It's that feeling you get in your stomach at the peak of the roller coaster, the pull of the adrenaline rush. It's as if we get high off of the fear, knowing damn well the seatbelts are fastened tightly and wondering all the same if this will be the one time they accidentally break loose on the descent. Yet it is not naivety that drives us to believe these stories. These tales of gateways into hell, of devil worship, of evil witches, demons, and the occult. It is purely desire, a cultural, adrenaline-seeking desire that brings them to life. They say on the night before Halloween, a woman in a white dress lures drivers into their death along the highway's edge, never to be seen again. In the case of Stoll, such stories have ignited the curiosity of generations of University of Kansas students. And with their adolescent interest have come articles, explorations, and fictionalized accounts that have given the legend of Stoll seemingly everlasting life. Just like any great myth, whispers led to a sense of hysteria, and from circumstance, a story grew tales of visits from the devil and sights of witches levitating around a dilapidated and since destroyed small town church and its cemetery. Legend says that tales of the occult were documented in Stoll as far back as 1974. Haunted Lawrence by Paul Thomas tells of an intrepid reporter named Jane Penner, who wrote for the University Daily Kansas and documented the devil's travels to the tiny Kansas destination. And when better to visit Stoll, Kansas than Halloween and the spring equinox? As the story goes, the University Daily Kansas, like the devil, keeps a tight schedule, as these stories seem to suddenly appear in late September, year after year. But of course, Halloween, what's known as the rehearsal dinner before the Day of the Dead, is when the spooks are closest to the surface. With a great urban legend, it is vital that just enough reality makes its way into the story that we can hold on to that question of, but what if? Penner's story included interviews with students who experienced strange occurrences in Stoll, like the tales that now litter the internet about seemingly satanic Stoll. Students reported crazy, inexplicable things to Penner. One noted that a house looked like it was burning, and another student told Penner that he was grabbed by something unseen. But the key to the story was Gary Mason, a journalism professor who told Penner about a photo project related to a witch's coven in Stoll. Photographs, after all, are the ultimate receipts. Yet, those photos have never popped up on even the most rabbit hole subreddit or witchy aesthetic Tumblr blog, despite a vast interest in the scary stories of Stoll, and all for the better. Because that is very much the point. We do not want the proof of the coven or the gateway to hell, or the malignant spirits that haunt every small town, graveyard, and abandoned manor house. The promise of proof itself is an illusion, enough to take us on the ride of the urban legend. After all, legends must remain legends. In the original version of the legend, the cemetery itself was the epicenter of all the spookiness, and the church was just a creepy ruin that added to the atmosphere. Furthermore, there was not much talk about Stoll being a gateway until much later around the 1980s. By that time, the chapel had become the focus of most legends, and people said that somewhere around it was a stairway to hell. That's how all the gateway to hell stuff started. The legend also claimed that if you found the stairway, you would be compelled to walk to the bottom, where you'd be trapped in hell. Popular culture has both capitalized on and catapulted forward the way we embrace, retell, and experience tales of ghosts and ghouls. We are desperate for the contrast of the peaceful countryside shattered by gore and hauntings. We embrace the abandoned farmhouse and chapel for its promise of scares, and we continue to tell stories around the campfire. The more of these stories we tell, a spine-chilling cycle of escaping into the horrifying and deranged, an interest for the monsters under our beds, continue to grow. One of the many demonic stories of Stoll surrounds a tree located in the cemetery that was rumored to have been a hanging tree. Part of the story is true. There was, in fact, a tree in Stoll Cemetery. Lisa Hefner included details about the historical tree in a chapter titled The Demonic Church for the book Haunted Kansas, Ghost Stories and Other Eerie Tales. But the tree was never evil. It was just unique. Lisa noted that the natural growth of the tree had in fact cut a tombstone in half, and it said that it was done by the ghosts of dead witches. Many locals believe on the full moon, witches gather near the old well to cast spells that lure young lovers to hell. As the tree had grown and the base of the trunk had spread, the tombstone had been split in two, leaving half of the marker on each side of the tree, she explains in the book. Strangely enough, the stone marked the final resting place of two individuals, Betty and Frankie Thomas, both of whom died in 1879. As all legends do, the tree took on a bigger life in a more intriguing horror story. The tree wasn't just a part of the landscape, splitting a tombstone that marked the resting place of a couple. Instead, that tree took root as a symbol of something sinister. In the graveyard where the tree was located, a tombstone marked with the last name Wittich also became tied into the story. There is no coincidence in horror. Paul Thomas has a theory on the witchy history and the tree. What he hypothesized is that local youths growing up in a time before the internet started to mix history with legend, spreading a rumor that a witch had been hanged from a tree in the cemetery and then buried in the cemetery itself. To prevent people from knowing where the body was, the townsfolk erected a tombstone that read Wittich to throw people off. Then, it was said that the tree grew so big it began splitting tombstones in half as a sort of divine punishment. From there, the legend grew and grew until there was a need to explain why witches were in the area in the first place. The stories, no matter how they evolved and no matter how unbelievable they have become, are very much believable. Small town Stoll is now deeply rooted in devilish, demonic pop culture. Stoll's story is so well known that according to Thomas, even Kurt Cobain took a trip there when Nirvana played in Lawrence. Now he's not the only one. Even Ariana Grande visited the town and claimed she smelled the fumes of sulfur. Today the church and tree are no longer there in the cemetery due to them being torn down. Stoll's wicked reputation is like a rumor that has been stoked into literal hellfire. But when so much true evil exists, so much real evil pervades everyday life, why is it that we so desperately want to conjure the devil to dance among us? Many would say, he already does. What creates these urban legends that everyone loves and why they continue to be stories told through generations is our desire to believe them.